The Atlanta Braves had one of the best, if not the best, catching tandem in all of baseball in 2022. And it wasn't the duo they thought it was going to be when they signed Manny Pena this past offseason. But instead, William Contreras had a breakout year for the Atlanta Braves, setting up the question, is he the primary catcher of the future for this Atlanta Braves team? And how much longer can Travis d'Arnaud keep it going? We're going to review the catcher's year and talk about the future at the position and what they do with Manny Pena this offseason. All of that on this episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. And download the Locked On Sports Atlanta app on Roku and Amazon Fire devices for free. I am your host, Jake Mastriani. You can follow me on Twitter at shortstopball. Also, make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. Send in any questions, comments, or feedback that you have for the podcast as we gear up for the offseason for the Atlanta Braves. And with that, we will continue to bring you coverage daily throughout the offseason. It's more so going to be 3 or 4 times a week instead of 5 days a week. But we'll still have plenty of coverage here throughout the offseason, especially once the World Series in and offseason news picks up. We'll have a lot more to talk about. But for right now, going to continue our player reviews for the 2022 season. Did several last week. I already talked a lot about Dansby Swanson, Matt Olson, Austin Riley, Ron Acuna Jr. if you want to go back and check those out. But today we're going to talk about the catching duo of Travis d'Arnaud and William Contreras, because they wound up being the best catching tandem in all of baseball this year. And when you put them together, it was the best catcher all season for any team. So we're going to talk about those two and what the future looks like, because Travis could be held for a couple of more years. Contreras obviously has a lot of team control, and they have Manny Pena as well. So it could be an interesting offseason at the catcher position with what the Braves decide to do there. But let's start with Travis d'Arnaud. And the Braves signed him for the 2020 season for 2 years, $16 million. And that was, before the 2020 season, before the world went crazy with the pandemic. And he was really good in that 2020 season, a 1.6 WAR player, again, in a 60-game sample size. Missed most of the regular season for 2021. Still, the Braves signed him in August of that year, extended him for 2 more years at $8 million a year. And he ended up catching every game of the 2021 postseason that led to a World Series. He was nearly a 4 WAR player in 2022 and was a Gold Glove finalist. And we have those Gold Glove winners announced. We'll talk about those a little later on, as the Braves had a couple who won the award. Travis d'Arnaud also had a career-high 18 home runs in 2022. He also hit 2 runs and drove in 5 in the postseason, one of just a few batters for the Braves who had it going in the 2022 postseason. He has 1 year left on his deal, guaranteed year in 2023, but he also has an $8 million player option for 2024, which will be his age 35 season. So it'll be interesting to see if the Braves might entertain picking that up, and we'll discuss that a little later as well. As far as Contreras, in 7 minor league seasons, he slashed 281, 346, 413. There's never really been a question about the bat of William Contreras. It's always been about his defense and whether he could handle the job, full-time or even in a part-time role defensively. There's never really been a question about the bat of William Contreras. But when he came up and got his first cup of coffee in 2020, and then he got a shot in 2021 because of all the injuries at the catcher position. But in 2021, he slashed just 215, 303, 399, and showed struggles behind the plate that a lot of evaluators and scouts were concerned of. So you went in last offseason, Braves really weren't sure what they were going to get from William Contreras in 2022. So they went out and signed Manny Pena, because they didn't believe William Contreras could be that catcher that could be a primary catcher or even part-time. What was really surprising as well, because I felt like that was the Braves' feeling on Contreras, is that he couldn't handle that load as a catcher. And I thought, and I could have bet the house, that Shea Langoliers was going to be the future catcher for the Atlanta Braves. But then obviously Alex Anthopoulos makes the trade, and he trades him to the Oakland Athletics in that Matt Olson deal. And then it became like, what is going to be the future for the Braves at catcher? Because they just traded the guy who I think a lot of us thought was going to be the future primary catcher for the Atlanta Braves. And then Manny Pena gets hurt, very early into the season, really was never healthy even when the season started, but ends up, hurting himself and being out for the rest of the year. And then William Contreras comes up. He takes full advantage of the opportunity. He slashes 278, 354, 506. And oh, by the way, made the All-Star team as a DH. So talk about taking advantage of an opportunity given. He finished the year with 20 home runs. Just an incredible season from William Contreras. And William Contreras and Travis d'Arnaud, in my mind, were the best catching tandem in all of baseball. And I honestly think it's not even close. When you look at their numbers just when they caught, and the numbers I'm about to give you, this is just when they were playing catcher, they slashed 282, 348, 521. That is the numbers just for those two when they were catching, which is pretty incredible. They were tops in OPS at 869. The next closest catcher in OPS was Toronto at 823. So 869 to 823. The next closest in slugging was the Phillies at 480. So again, a 40-point difference there. They hit 35 home runs from the catcher position. Cubs were the next closest at 28. A lot of those coming from Williams' brother Wilson. They had the most hits from the catcher position with 169. They were fifth in doubles at 34, but there were 4 teams tied for first place with 36. So they were just 2 doubles behind that. Fangraphs ranked them third in WAR at the catcher position at 6.4, but that's because they combined all of the primary catcher stats, whether they were playing catcher or not. So they had Toronto ranked first at 7.3, and the Phillies ranked second at 7.0. So either way you slice it up, you want to look at it, the Braves, in my mind, easily, got the most production offensively out of their catcher position all year long. And when you look at defense as well, Travis d'Arnaud was a Gold Glove finalist. Now, you can question whether or not he deserved that, but I mean, you look at his numbers, 6 defensive run saves. He was 8.4 catch frame rating on Fangraphs. I mean, all the metrics and everything there shows you that Travis d'Arnaud was great defensively behind the plate. I thought William Contreras was great as well. I was maybe even more impressed with that this year because, like I said, I never really questioned his ability to hit the ball just based on his track record in the minors. But it was the defense for me this year, the way that he called a game. I think it helped a lot that he was catching a lot of young guys that he had caught at the AAA level last year, whether it be Spencer Strider or Kyle Wright. I think that certainly, helped some, but I thought he was great defensively. I thought he did a wonderful job blocking baseballs. I thought he did an okay job throwing out runners. Neither he nor d'Arnaud are necessarily great at that. Braves pitchers don't help in that either. So I thought they were both outstanding defensively behind the plate, but d'Arnaud was good enough that, he was a Gold Glove finalist, and it's pretty obvious that Snitker trusts him the most with the pitching staff behind the plate. So Braves have done a wonderful job for really several years now. You go back to the Kurt Suzuki, Tyler Flowers days, then he brought in McCann and brought in d'Arnaud. The Braves have always done a great job of bringing in these catching tandems, typically veteran catchers that come in and just do a great job of handling the staff. They give you enough offensively, and they've just done an outstanding job with the catcher position for a long time now, just finding 2 guys that really they can trust, where you don't just have a primary guy who's getting worn out. Look, not many catchers can do what JT Realmuto does, and it's why he's the best in the game. Not many catchers can play 140 games behind the plate, take all that punishment, still hit the way that he does. He's just a unicorn in that regard. But I think the Braves do a great job of bringing in 2 guys that first of all, are going to help defensively, going to be able to control or be able to help their pitchers and call a good game. But also, you can keep them fresh so that they give you something at the plate as well, typically home runs. And I just think they've done such a great job finding these catchers for, like I said, the last 6-7 years now. But there is going to be a decision to be had going forward in terms of what the Braves do at the catcher position, because just personally, I don't think they thought William Contreras could handle it long term. And he showed me in 2022 that I think he can. And obviously, he's under team control for a long time. You got Manny Pena, who's locked up through next season as well. Travis d'Arnaud, who's locked up through at least next season. So, what are they going to do with the catcher position going forward? We're going to talk about that next. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, NHL, and golf. I got the World Series on right now. Phillies up 3-0, hitting a bunch of home runs. Bryce Harper having his moment as well with a 2-run homer, and Ranger Suarez continuing to break bats and get ground balls, as Braves are all too familiar with. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. So what is the future for the catcher position for the Atlanta Braves? If you're live with me in chat, let me know your thoughts. Do you think William Contreras can handle the job primarily long-term? Should the Braves can look to extend Travis d'Arnaud and keep that tandem together for even longer? Do they trade Manny Pena this offseason? Let me know in the chat below, and we'll talk about it in the final segment. But let's start with Travis d'Arnaud. He could be a free agent after the 2023 season. Obviously, if he comes out in 2023 and has a similar season to what he had in 2022, he's a Gold Glove finalist, he hits well, hits for power, then they're obviously going to pick up that option for 2024. That's becomes a no-brainer at that point. The one thing with d'Arnaud is he has a history of injuries, and we've even seen that with the Braves at times. Was healthy for most of this year, and I think being able to split those catching duties will certainly help. I mean, if it becomes more of a split between he and William Contreras, I think that goes a long way and keeping Travis d'Arnaud healthy, keeping him on the field, and keeping him effective. So I think that's a huge part of this. But there is certainly some injury concern with d'Arnaud throughout his career. It's really been the biggest thing, I think, that has held him back. But can't always predict injuries. So if he comes out in 2023, plays the majority of the season, has a similar year, I would expect them to pick up that option for 2024 at $8 million. Not a lot for a really good veteran catcher. And he's clearly the guy that Brian Snitker trusts behind the plate. You go back to the 2021 postseason, caught every single inning, every single game. Granted, there wasn't a ton of options. I mean, they even had Shea Langoliers on the taxi squad. There just weren't a lot of good options behind d'Arnaud last year. But even this year in that Mets series, Travis caught every game. In the postseason, Travis caught every game. That's clearly the guy that Snitker trusts back there when it matters the most. And he's also become somewhat of a quiet leader. We've talked about it. Freddie Freeman's, gone. If Dansby Swanson leaves this offseason, who becomes the leader of this team? I think Travis d'Arnaud, just because of the position he plays and that veteran presence that he is, I think he's somewhat of a leader on this team. So we'll see, how that plays into their decision to keep him around. Look, they're not going to keep him around if he doesn't produce. He's got to produce in 2023 and show that he's healthy. But as things sit now, I think there's a really good chance that the Braves pick up that 2024 option. As for William Contreras, he's going to turn 25 in December. Still really young for a catcher. It takes catchers a while to really, develop and get to the big league level and understand how to, hit at the big league level while also handling a pitching staff, which I think was a big adjustment for William Contreras, one that I thought, again, he did a tremendous job of in 2022. He's still going to be pre-arbitration eligible in 2023, and he could be under team control through 2028. So is he the future catcher of the Braves? you had asked me this coming into 2022, I would have said, no way. That was what we've seen of him at the big league level so far and what we saw from him, especially defensively. But what he showed me in 2022, again, not at the plate, I always thought he could hit, but what he showed me behind the plate leads me to believe I think he could be a primary catcher for the Braves in the future. I think he has what it takes to handle that job full time. I don't think the Braves are ever, I don't want to say ever, but I don't think they're looking for a catcher that's going to catch 120, 130 games. I think they love what they have going. And like I said, they've done a great job of it, of having two, veteran guys who can split the duties and keep, each guy fresh for the entire season. So I don't know that it'll ever be a primary catcher that, again, catches 130 games. But either way, I think William Contreras has shown that he's capable of carrying that load and being somebody that catches 90, 100 games a year for you and gets the bulk of starts behind the plate. I feel like he has become that guy now and can be for the Braves. As far as the farm system goes and who's behind him, there's not really much. They just drafted Drake Baldwin, who is a guy that I really like. But again, we're talking about somebody who probably is not ready until 2025, 2026. But I really like the bat. There's questions about him behind the plate as well. But, that's probably who's next in line to be somebody who could be, a full-time catcher for you. So there's just really not much else in the farm system coming along. Again, for William Contreras, my thoughts on him, I feel comfortable with him being a primary catcher. I think the strides he made behind the plate, especially if an electronic strike zone comes, and I'm not saying he wasn't good at framing pitches, but I think that will obviously, help him behind the plate as well. And there's also the ability to make him a full-time DH. And I think that's certainly somewhere to go. If you wanted to bring in another veteran catcher to pair with Travis d'Arnaud, and they have one already on the roster, which we'll talk about in a second. But if you felt like he had more value just focusing on hitting and becoming the DH, the primary DH for the team, I would be okay with that as well. I think he could fit that role very, very well for the Braves and just be, a primary DH, maybe catches every now and then when you need him to. So I think there's either way. I think he's shown with the bat that he can hit at this level. We know what he did at the minor league level. And for me, he has shown me this past season that he has what it takes behind the plate as well to handle a pitching staff, to block baseballs, to control a run game. He showed all those things to me in 2022. So what about Manny Pena? What happens to him going forward? Braves have him signed in 2023 for $4.5 million. That's, a good chunk of money. That's not just anything to scoff at. That is sizable money. I do think if the Braves wanted to trade him or felt like they needed to trade him, they didn't want to carry another catcher, and they felt good with William Contreras splitting those catching duties with Travis d'Arnaud, I think he would be easy to trade. You're not going to get anything significant in return, but there's plenty of teams out there that want a veteran backup catcher at, that price tag. So I think it would be very easy to move Manny Pena if the Braves wanted to, if they wanted to clear that money for some other moves, and they may have to. We're going to talk about payroll more and roster cuts here coming up pretty soon, but Braves may be looking for ways to clear some payroll, and certainly moving Manny Pena could do that. However, I like the idea of extra catching depth. And the question just becomes, do you carry three catchers? And I think with the DH, I think you can have three catchers because you're not going to use all those bench guys every night. But again, I don't know that the Braves will be willing to do that, and to do that for a guy at $4.5 million that you may not use. I don't think the Braves would necessarily be willing to do that, but I don't mind the idea of having three catchers, especially if that frees up William Contreras to play every day, whether as a DH or at catcher. I certainly want him in the lineup as much as possible. So if I had to guess now, I'd say the Braves trade Manny Pena and then, maybe look for another veteran on a much cheaper deal that you can stash in AAA, because catching depth is so important. We saw that in 2021 where the Braves went through several catchers. You need those guys who can come fill in if an injury happens, as injuries often do with catchers. So having that catching depth is so important. They're not going to send Manny Pena to AAA. They're not going to send William Contreras down there. He's shown too much, proven too much with the bat. He's going to be on the big league roster. So perhaps they trade Manny Pena, look for another veteran catcher that they can stash in AAA to give you that depth there. If I had to guess right now, that's what I say the Braves would do this offseason. All right, next, got a little bit of news to get to. Also want to get to some of your questions and comments, and we'll do that after this break. A little bit of news from Tuesday. And oh, by the way, hope you all had a great Halloween weekend. Certainly enjoyed the festivities with the kids over the weekend, but they wore me out, which is why we didn't have a podcast on Monday. So I do apologize for that, but hope you all enjoyed the Halloween weekend. But had some news on Tuesday as they announced the Gold Glove winners. Max Fried won for the third consecutive year. And I bet you if he were here to talk about that with me now and you gave him congratulations on it, he'd say thanks, but it's the play he didn't make in the postseason that is still in the back of his mind and one that is still bothering him. But we know how great Max Fried is defensively, and that's pretty much his award, for however long he's in a big league starting rotation. But Dansby Swanson got his first ever Gold Glove. He's been close a couple of times and certainly had some opportunities, but he finally takes home the award for the first time. Not much of a surprise there. I would have been shocked had he not won the Gold Glove. So glad to see that he did get his first one. Well deserved. The job that he does at shortstop, so pivotal, and gives him a little bit more in his camp to argue as contract negotiations come up this offseason. He now has that under his belt as well. A little bit of World Series update. Like I said, currently watching now. Phillies up 4-0 now in the bottom of the second. So they are remaining hot. Again, just so similar to what the Braves did last offseason. It makes me a little upset that the Braves couldn't do the same thing, but it just goes to show you get hot at the right time, anybody can win the World Series. Baseball can be so random at times, especially the more teams you let into a postseason. You're going to have things like this happen. And, I think the Astros are the better team. I said that before the postseason even started, but the way the Phillies are playing right now, and they've got the home crowd behind them, they certainly are a hot team, and they're more than capable of taking this World Series. So hopefully you're able to sit back and watch and enjoy that a little bit as we got a couple more days of baseball left, and then the off season's going to kick up. We're going to have a lot more things to talk about here. But let's jump into some of the comments and questions on the night. Medic 4 Outdoors, Anthony says, is it February yet? I'm right there with you. I tweeted out today as well. It's 108 days until the college baseball season starts. I write for College Baseball Nation, and I love the college baseball season. So I'm counting down the days to college baseball season. Chris Kaysen says, go Braves, and says, without a doubt, the best duo in 2022 for the catcher position. I got to agree with you there, Chris. I think there's no doubt in my mind what Travis d'Arnaud, William Contreras did was the best at the catcher position for any team. Davis Gorman says, so do you believe that when all is said and done that William Contreras will be better than Shea Langeliers? That's a great question. One I actually haven't even thought about. Look, I still think Shea Langeliers is going to be a better catcher just because he was already great defensively when he came into the league. And that's going to play more for a catcher long term. And I think the power is going to be there for Shea as well. And I think he's going to have that power. I said when I was previewing him last year, going through prospect rankings, I think he'll be a potential Gold Glove type catcher. And I think he'll hit 250 with 20 home runs a year. And that's a really good catcher that I think will be in the league for a long time. Look, can Contreras be that? Sure. And I think he can be even more than that with the bat. He showed this year he had 20 home run power, and hit over 270. So there's certainly the possibility for him to do that and be that. It's a great question. It's definitely a lot closer now than what I would have thought last offseason. And Davis had also asked, do I think he'll be better than his all-star brother Wilson? I don't think he'll be that good. Wilson Contreras is maybe the second, third best catcher in the league behind JT Realmuto. So I don't know that he ever reaches his brother's elite status, but I do think he has the capability because, like I said, there's never been a question about him hitting. I think he's going to hit. It's just whether or not he catches well enough to stay at the position as a primary catcher. Do they move him to DH? Again, I think he showed me in 2022 he can handle it defensively. And then Christina and Rodney Hampton said that William Contreras is big for this team. He certainly was. Look, I talked about it all year long. You talk about breakout stars for the Braves in 2022. It was Kyle Wright on the pitching side of things. I know you had Spencer Strider breakout as well, but for me, guys you didn't see coming. I thought there was a possibility Spencer Strider could come up and do big things this year. I had no idea what to expect from Kyle Wright. He came in and had a breakout season. I didn't think we were honestly really going to get anything from William Contreras this year. I thought maybe he'd come up every now and then and fill a role if Travis d'Arnaud or Manny Pena got hurt, but I didn't think he'd become an all-star and do the things that he did. So he was huge for this team in 2022 with what he did behind the plate and what he did at the plate as well. All right, that will do it for this episode of Locked On Braves. As always, thanks for making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. For your next listen, check out Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. I'm sure they'll be talking about this World Series game to hear, maybe an Astros comeback late in this one. So make sure you check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, available just like this podcast on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. Again, thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. Thanks for joining me here live. For those who did, make sure you follow me on Twitter at ShortstopBall so you get notified whenever I go live this offseason with a podcast. Also, make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.